When we think of crimes and mysteries, a few seem to leap out at us from memory alone. Katie Cabin, the Cleveland Torso Killer, the Axeman of New Orleans, to name a few. But beneath these stories, more interesting, confusing, or plain upsetting mysteries are buried. What lies just beyond the realm of the normal, just out of sight? Welcome back to NormanRebates. In today's episode of Vintage Mysteries, we tackle the eerie death of the 8-Day Bride. The 8-Day Bride is the media's name given to Christina Kettlewell. She was born August 7, 1925 in Ontario, Canada, as Christina Cecilia Moken, the name that also adorns her headstone. She married Jack Kettlewell on May 12, 1947, in secret after suspiciously disappearing from her family's home for 2 weeks. It was reported that Christina's father opposed the marriage because Jack wasn't Roman Catholic, so the duo decided to elope. So far, the tale doesn't sound too far outside the realm of a young woman falling in love and making a split-second decision. But things might seem different when Ronald Barry enters the picture, or rather, when Ronald Barry refuses to leave. Ronald Barry, originally named Ronald Chiuffo, was an Italian immigrant to Canada. He had tried to establish a construction business and an insurance firm, but both had flopped, and he eventually became a professional ballroom dancer. He and Jack were close friends, nearly inseparable. Barry even went on the Kettlewells' honeymoon with them to Severn Falls, where Barry owned a cottage that they would stay in. Barry's persistence in staying close by the pair raised questions with Christina's family if Ronald was in love with her. I'd keep a pin in that thought because it'll come up in an interesting way a little later. On the outside, the Kettlewell honeymoon seemed to be going pretty smoothly. They spent a part of it at a home in Toronto with Barry close by, but moved to the cottage on May 17th. On May 20th, a fire broke out in the cottage at Severn Falls. Both Barry and Jack Kettlewell made it out of the blaze, but reported that Christina was nowhere to be found. Jack had suffered a head wound and the apparent after effects of a drug at the time, and Ronald had to be treated for minor burns and shock. Police and other responders to the blaze took water directly from the river to douse the cottage with and saw no sign of her, though numerous people would have passed the place where Christina's body was eventually found, face down in a pool of muddied water in her pajama pants and a man's shirt. It was discovered that Ronald Barry was the beneficiary on not one, but two separate life insurance policies taken out just before the pair's wedding. Both 5,000 Canadian dollars at the time and around 65,000 Canadian adjusted to today's inflation. The life insurance policies contained double indemnity clauses, which meant that in the case of an accidental death, the payout would be doubled, as well as another $5,000 policy on the cottage. Jack, who was a veteran, also handed over his wartime gratuities to Barry. The ring that Jack had used to propose to Christina, which was borrowed from a friend, was never recovered, leading some to speculate that if money was the motive of this case, it might have been sold or pawned off. But why would Jack fork over a small fortune's worth of money and insurance claims to a friend and not a member of his family? According to Jack himself, he and Ronald were in love, rather than the suspicion that Ronald was in love with Christina. Though Jack would later recant the admission that he had made, stating that he only told the police and his lawyer what they wanted to hear, some latch onto this idea. Crown lawyer Hope stated that once Jack agreed to the insinuation of he and Ronald being lovers, he became emotional, and things started to fall into place. One resident of Severn Falls remembered that the men's trips to town and constant proximity to each other were well known. Everyone seemed to wonder why Jack Kettlewell would get married at all. Barry was instrumental in the couple's engagement, and some suggest that it was because he knew something of a secret of Christina's. On April 6th of that year, Christina had written a letter addressed to Ronald Barry detailing her fears of not receiving a proposal from Jack, and her plans to take her own life by means of poisoning. By the end of April, she wrote another letter, this time detailing her desire to take both her life and Jack's. This letter was also written to Ronald Barry, and contained allusions that some say might indicate that she knew of Jack's interest in someone else or his possible affair with Barry himself. The final letter was written May 19th, this time addressed to the owner of the house that they had stayed in for the beginning of their honeymoon, and stated as follows. Ronnie is on the boat somewhere. By the time he gets back, everything will be over with. He must have been afraid something would happen because he's staying an extra day to make sure we go back to Toronto with him. Christina asked Ronald to mail it, but he doesn't appear to have done so. After pulling Jack from the flames, Ronald went back to save these notes from the fire. But why? The fact that he spent time saving these notes from the fire points the finger at Ronald Barry, but there were no burns or signs of trauma on Christina's body. The only suspicious findings made during the autopsy were the traces of codeine in her system. The official cause of death was labeled as a drowning, but again, no one saw her body when they were moving between the river and the cottage. 3 years after the affair, Jack Kettlewell remarried. He never divorced his second wife, but separated from her in 1969 after having a son, Richard. Richard, now an adult, believes that Ronald Barry manipulated his father, and the whole ordeal was a setup by Barry for money. Ronald Barry disappeared into New York, leaving behind his Pekingese Ying for Richard, and was never seen again. Today, at the site of the Severn Falls cottage, a new cottage has been built, and the case of Christina Kettlewell's mysterious death remains as cold as the ashes it sits upon. As far as my personal theories go, it's really hard to come up with something concrete. Although it is suspicious to me that Ronald would go back for those suicide notes, and Christina's body wasn't found until hours after the fire, I still don't really know what to think. The inquest didn't really find Ronald Barry or Jack Kettlewell guilty of anything. Although I know that there are plenty of cases where the guilty man gets away with it, it's still interesting to me that there was nothing other than the insurance policies that really considered them to be at fault for this. It's also interesting to me whether or not it was coerced that Jack would admit to being in a homosexual relationship in 1947, even in Canada. It's just such an interesting case full of twists and turns and two different kinds of a love triangle, and it's just interesting to me that we don't have answers. It's also interesting that Jack Kettlewell wouldn't have mentioned it to his second wife or his child. Richard, his son, said that he and his wife found microfilms in the library that contained newspaper articles about this, and that's how they discovered the Kettlewell murder, suicide, whatever you want to call it. The case of the 8-Day Bride is just so fascinating to me, and I'm surprised fewer people haven't heard about it. I mean, I did a quick YouTube search, and there's the BuzzFeed Unsolved video and like a few others, but it's not as widespread as I expected it would be. But I guess that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening today. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next episode. I'm looking at twice-a-week uploads, and I know one will be on Fridays, but I'm not so sure about Mondays or Wednesdays for the first upload of the week. Regardless, this episode is going up on a Wednesday. As far as the time of the day, the episodes will just have to be released whenever I have time. I don't have a fixed work schedule as of yet, so it makes definitive scheduling kind of difficult. Also, I've got a better microphone on the way, and it should be here in time for me to record Friday's video, so hopefully the audio quality for that one will be much better. I'm also going to try to take way more time on this video and work on thumbnails and things like that and try to make it look a little more professional. I know the last one was kind of thrown together really quickly, but that was because I had a whole video made and I guess I didn't save it, so I had to throw it all together again. But that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for stopping by. Peace.